My lifetime in this planet is a blink of an eye, a speck of sand. Pow, it's over. That you would spend one moment of that blink of an eye bitching and moaning your lot in life. If you spend one moment of that speck of sand, that blink of an eye, not pursuing your dream, not going after what it is you want, it's spitting in your master's face and saying, I don't appreciate this great gift of life. Every day is a celebration. Every day you open your eyes. What wonderful thing am I going to do today? Whose life might I change today? Who might change my life? If someone knocked on your door every day of your life and brought you a unique, original gift every day, how much would you appreciate the gift? How much would you appreciate the giver of the gift? So in answer to your question, yes, go for it. She should go for his, you should go for yours, we both should go for it. That's what you're put here for.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to a very special interview today. This is Vito Glazers After Dark podcast, live from West Hollywood, California. I'm in the house with the legendary Tom Dreesen. Tom, how does it feel to be in Hollywood right now?
I've been here for 45 years now in this area, but essentially when you say legendary, I always say whenever they give me that title, I say, how I became a legend? All my critics are dead. I outlived them all.
There's a lot of people in the media right now that kind of wish that would happen for them as well. But you've been out here 45 years. But one thing we got in common that I just found out downstairs is we're both born and raised in Chicago. So we're Chicago refugees, right? We're out here. Before I go into the whole Chicago thing, I want to talk to you a little bit about little advice that I just recently started sharing with people. And I had a kind of aggressive acquaintance come to me, and they were trying to give me a lot of financial advice, right? And they're like, oh, you guys in Hollywood, you guys are all weirdos, you're getting too much sunshine. And he was trying to tell me, I need to do like more investing and I should like stop doing as much entertainment and get more into business and stuff like that. And I politely had to tell him, I don't take advice from people that live in the cold. So what's your experience been like that? I mean, do you ever miss Chicago? Do you miss the seasons? Do you miss the family?
I miss Chicago all the time. I don't miss 40 below zero, And when I answer, and I'm a golfer, that's one of my passions is golf. And so that a friend of mine was 57 years old. He lived in Chicago, and he said, Tom, I live in Chicago. If I live the national average 75, he said, I hope I live a lot longer. But if I live the national average, that means I got 18 years left. And he said, of golf. He said, if I stay in Chicago, I've only got 9. It cuts it in half.
Yeah, it does.
So out here, we're going to play golf in January and in February and all season long. But I'm a Cub fan. I'm a Bear fan. I'm a Bulls fan.
Yep.
The people of Chicago, I got started there in show business, and they supported me, and they're very supportive even to this day. When I go back home, so that I miss. I miss the neighborhood thing.
Yeah.
We don't have neighborhoods out here in Los Angeles. When you grew up in Chicago, you knew everybody in your neighborhood, and everybody knew you, and you knew the families and everything. Out here, you don't know your next door neighbor after 25 years.
You've got gates. People pay extra to not know the neighbors. I know I actually moved. I spent a lot of money to not have to talk to my neighbors. So that's just kind of how it is out here. Yeah. But okay, so let's talk a little bit about Chicago. You're from the South Side?
Yeah, I'm from a suburb called Harvey, Illinois.
Yep.
Harvey, when I was growing up, it was steel mills and factories. It was a microcosm of Chicago. It, working class, blue collar people. We had maybe 18 different type factories. They made everything from clutch plates to crankshafts and taverns. We had 36 taverns and all, and my father frequented every single one of them at one time or another. We had a very poor family. There were 8 of us in a family, 10 counting my mom and dad. There were 4 boys and 4 girls. We lived in a shack. I shined shoes in taverns. I set pins in bowling alleys. I caddied in the summertime. I sold newspapers on the corner, all to help feed my brothers and sisters. And none of this do I regret. But that's how I was raised. At age 16, I had to drop out of high school because I had holes in my shoes. I wore raggedy clothes to school. And when you're in high school, everybody dresses to the nines, and you stand out if you aren't, dressed like them or look like them. So I was 16. I dropped out of high school. I worked in a bowling alley. I started running with a pretty tough crowd, and getting in street fights and things like that. Nothing I'm proud of. But then at 17, I went in the Navy, and it changed my whole life. I got a high school diploma from the Navy. For the first time in my life, what changed my life was in boot camp, they shave your head. Everybody's got a shaved head, and everybody wore the same clothes. So if you look around, all of a sudden I was equal. I was equal to everybody, and from this point on, it was up to me, to achieve things. But that was a major thing. The other thing was, I lived in a shack that had no bathtub, no shower, and no hot water. So I could stand under a shower and let as much hot water flow on me as much as I wanted. To this day, when I'm in a shower and hot water's on me, there's a sense of well-being comes over me. This is the truth. I only had one pair of shoes. Now I got 25 in my walk-in closet. So it does, little things, make me feel good. But it changed my life, and service did.
Yeah, that's great. So you're a veteran, and you were in the Navy?
I was in the Navy 4 years. I served on 2 aircraft carriers, the USS Tarawa and the USS Essex. But I also served with the Marine Corps unit for 9 months called NEGDF, Naval Emergency Ground Defense Force.
Did you see any combat?
No. We trained for combat morning, noon, and night. I mean, that's what you do constantly. But I was in from 1956 to 1960, so I missed that. It was prior to. Now, 2 years after I came out of the service, I was married. And I had a couple kids, and I was going to go back in. All my buddies were in Nam, in Vietnam. A lot of the guys I served with and everything. And my wife and I were on the outs at that time, and I wanted to go back in. And I asked the Marine Corps recruiter, I said, if I go in, because I trained with the Marine Corps, even though I went through Navy boot camp, I said, do I have to go through boot camp at Pendleton? And he said, let me check for you. He came back, and he did check my record. He said, yeah, you got to go through Pendleton. He said, Tom, you don't want to go. You try to get back with your wife and family. And
probably good advice. Yeah. And here's something interesting. Actually, this wasn't really originally in my list of questions, but it kind of brings back that kind of patriotism, and it's not something you see now. Now you really don't see people feeling obligated to serve their country, right? Like we used to. Before, it was kind of a badge of honor. It was kind of something you were called to. Why do you feel that's kind of changed throughout, the past 30, 40 years, or even, I don't know, now you're saying maybe almost 50 years. Why were people so, especially men, so excited to join the service and get involved with stuff and even think about going back and supporting their country in conflict? And now people just don't even really seem to care that much.
It comes from the school systems especially, but you got to remember, now when I was a young guy, World War II wasn't that far away, so everybody was patriotic in those days. I mean, in Harvey, Illinois, there was a pizza place that I hung out at. If you went in there, when I came out of the service, if there were 20 guys in there, 19 of them served. Only a couple were drafted. Most of them were all volunteers.
Right.
If you weren't going to college, then going into the military was a good thing. And every family where I grew up had members that had served in the armed forces, and several who had died in the armed forces, So there was a real strong sense of patriotism. I shined shoes in all these bars in my neighborhood. These were all World War II and Korean veterans, and they were just proud to serve. 4th of July parades in Harvey at that time, the flags were flown, and there was a real sense of America and how much you love this country and for what reasons. You can argue you want to argue with me about wars. I understand that. I spent 4 years in the service, but you can argue with me about Vietnam if you want to. I'll let you argue with me about a lot of things, about a lot of wars. I won't let you argue with me about World War II. If we lost that war, you and I'd be speaking a different language right now.
Right.
There was no doubt what Hitler had in mind for this country. There was no doubt what Tojo had in mind for this country. We would be in concentration camps. Those men and women of that era, Tom Brokaw was right. That was truly the greatest generation, because we were attacked from 2 nations. Pearl Harbor was destroyed. Most of our aircraft, our ships were destroyed. And these men and women ponied up. The women back home here, and the Rosie, the Riveters, and all that, working 3 shifts. Everybody that saved this nation. So I won't let you argue with me about that. And that's and I'll end with this. Today, young kids today, if the person they wanted to become president wasn't elected, then they had to go to safe spaces. They were so traumatized, They had to go to safe spaces. And I say to all of them, do you know where your grandparents were, your grandfather was, when he was your age, when he was 17 and 18? He was on places called Iwo Jima, Guadalcanal, Battle of the Bulge, Midway, Normandy, places you've never heard of, Macon Island. Because the reason you had never heard of them is your professors have never taught you about them or taught you about American history. But they were watching their buddies getting their arms and legs blown off, heads blown off. They were holding their buddies' bodies in their arms when they were dying, when they were your age. And not one of them ever asked for a safe space. Because you don't know it. You live in a safe space. It's called the United States of America, and because of those men and women.
Yeah, and I salute the vets, and I totally respect all your insight and your opinion on that. One thing you kind of just turned me on to right now that I'm thinking about is I was having a conversation with a political consultant. He's in Washington, and I said, the wars were fought differently back then, right? It was a lot of physical war. Now, the wars seem to be being fought. It's more of psychological warfare, economic warfare, almost social media warfare, right? It's the power is being taken and controlled through a longer, I call it, these international enemies of America are playing the long game. So how do you, have you seen that as well? Being in the entertainment industry, I actually think that Hollywood is one of the targets of the international warfare. I think it's been infiltrated by a lot of money from countries that don't necessarily have America's best interests in mind. And they are actually using and weaponizing Hollywood content production and social media platforms in order to weaken America and take it over without ever having to fire a single bullet.
Amen.
Have you seen any insight on that with 45 years in the entertainment business?
For 52 years, really. I've been a comedian for 52 years, but I've been out in Hollywood since 1975, 74, 75. But Plato said, give me your storytellers and I'll rule your country. Give me your storytellers.
Yes.
Politics is downstream of pop culture. Give me your storytellers, I'll rule your country. And Hollywood is the storyteller. They tell the story. So certainly you want to infiltrate that. The wise thing, that the enemies of this nation have done. First thing you must do, you've got to remember the America I grew up in. You went to school in the morning, and you said a morning prayer. You said the Lord's Prayer. I went to Catholic school, right? And then you said the Pledge of Allegiance. There was a flag in every classroom, in every classroom in America. So first thing I do, we got to stop this nation from believing in a God. They must believe in a government, but not in a God. For God's sake, not in a God. 90% of Americans believed in God after World War II. Today, about 52% or something like that. So they succeeded. And whatever you do, don't let them pledge allegiance to the flag. You pledge allegiance to the government. That's what you do, not to that flag. Let's disrespect that flag as much as you want. In fact, let's burn it. Let's burn the flag and say, we've got a right to do that. We've got a right to do that. We can burn the American flag. And they did it. And they're very successful. Our enemies are very, very successful without pulling a trigger anywhere. And every generation has to renew that patriotic thing. Every generation. And it hasn't been renewed in maybe 5 generations,
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. Well, if I was the current mainstream media, I would just take that clip of you saying, let's burn the flag, and I would just post that everywhere and leave the rest of this interview on the editing room floor.
That's exactly what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
They control the narrative, By the way, people are listening to this saying, this guy's a comedian?
Yeah, I was going to say this. We got a little intense off the bat, but it's okay. It's, I'm all about just perpetuating the conversation, whatever you have in your mind. I
agree.
You actually... one thing I did want to ask you about, we were talking about kind of the owning the storytellers, right? And I recently got to meet Deepak Chopra. Are you familiar with Deepak Chopra? He's like a huge thought leader. He was on Oprah. Very cool guy, spiritual. He wrote a book on Buddha. He wrote a book about Jesus. Very brilliant man.
I know about him, but I don't know him, but I know about him.
So I got to ask him, kind of in a setting like this, I got to ask him a question, and I was really looking forward to it because I'm really into spirituality and higher thought process and stuff like that. And I decided I was going to try to stump him with a really good question. And now I own a PR company, so I was also hoping that whatever he answered was going to be something I could use in my advertising, right, to promote myself a little bit. Huh. So he ended up giving me the best possible answer. But I asked him, I said, Dr. Chopra, what do you think is the meaning of life? And he gave me this amazing answer right off the top of his head. He already had it ready. It's as if I had sent him the questions the day before. He said, the meaning of life is to share your story and to tell your story.
I agree.
And we had a discussion off camera after, and we were talking about and just breaking it down. And he's like, think about, you have an amoeba that's like a one-celled organism, right? What is that amoeba's purpose in life, right? Just to copy its DNA and make another one-celled organism, right? All the animals in the wild, what is their purpose is to pass on their species, right? And to pass on the information that they know that's genetically programmed into them. And humans do the same thing, right? But I feel that that's why the actors, the writers, the creators of humanity have always been held in the highest regard, right? In the movie The Social Network, there's a great quote where I love where the lawyers are talking to Harvard, and they're explaining it, and the Harvard professor says to them, we've had 10 presidents and 3 movie stars come out of Harvard. And the lawyer says, who are the movie stars? You know, so we hold storytellers at a very high regard, right? And I just was wondering, you know, in your life as being a storyteller, essentially, right? You've made an entire career out of first being an orator and a comedian, and then making a kind of a second career out of just talking about your days as a comedian, right? And I love your material. How do you feel about how important it is for people to share their story?
Well, it's the only reason you're put on this planet. Nothing, any information you have, Vito, was not yours. Somebody gave it to you. You learned it through hardships, but most of it was passed on, and so it's your responsibility to pass that on. You know, there was a book many years ago called The Magnificent Obsession, you know, and it doesn't have too much to talk what we're talking about, but it was written by Lloyd C. Douglas. Its predecessor was a book called Dr. Hudson's Secret Journal, and in it was the secret of success. If you want to become successful, you have to believe biblically when you say, I ask and you shall receive. When you ask your master, you say, I want to own my own PR firm one day, or I want to be a stand-up comedian. When you ask, and you have to absolutely believe, once you ask, you will receive. Well, in the book it says, once you ask and you know you're going to receive now, then you must keep your eyes and ears open for his less fortunate people, and you must help them. And if you can help them privately and quietly, even more so. Within 30 days, your master will reward you toward your endeavor. So, you know, anybody you can, if you help them, you have to swear them to secrecy and say, I'll help you, Vito, but you promise me you'll pay it forward. That you don't pay me back, pay it forward. Why I give the motivation talks that I do is what you're talking about. I'm a stand-up comedian first, last, and always. That's my preference and what I love to do.
Well, yeah, this interview's been hilarious so far, so I can see why.
But I slept in an abandoned car. We're out in front of Sunset Boulevard right now. I used to hitchhike up and down this strip. Begging to work for free at the Comedy Store. At that time, my wife and kids were in Chicago. I was struggling, you know. So I ended up sleeping in a car. It wasn't my car. It was up on blocks. It was an old Nash Rambler. The front seat came down. So I hitchhike up and down Sunset Boulevard, begging to work for free at the Comedy Store. And I succeeded. I succeeded in everything that I set out to do through doing these principles that I talk about in my motivation talks. Perception, all of life is about perception. Visualization, whatever the mind can see and believe it will achieve. Self-talk, the most important person you'll ever talk to is yourself. And develop a sense of humor. A sense of humor is when you have the ability to laugh, not at other shortcomings and misfortunes, you have the ability to laugh at your own. I learned these lessons, I read these books, and I practiced these things, and all my dreams have come true. Now, it's my responsibility to share that with others who may be going through the same thing. And that's what you have to do. Deepak Chopra, by the way, is just a brilliant guy. I read a couple of his books. I didn't quite understand what you said. I said, oh, yeah, I heard that name, but now I remember it very well. But that's exactly what you do. You know, you're put here you're going to change lives everywhere you meet. Just us, you being here, we changed Clara's life, you know, just because she had to be here. So everything that you do in life is changing something else's life. You know, it's all about, to me, passing on any information that can make somebody else's load lighter. You know, that was a long answer to a short question.
No, I love it. And so you touched on something. You said you were hitchhiking out here. You were married. You just got out of the service. You had some kids. The family's back in Chicago. You're here trying to make it in show business. I just got married about a year and a half ago, and I'm also married to a comedian. I'm married to Tori Herman. She's she does the Russian versus America comedy videos on Instagram, and it's not war based. She basically does humorous comparisons of Western culture versus Eastern European culture, and she's generated a gigantic following from it. So we have this conversation all the time. So we both work in the entertainment business, right? I'm more kind of in media and production and public relations, and she's more kind of, you know, front and center and getting a lot of attention. But we always talk about how blessed we are that our careers and our goals are aligned, right? Because we're constantly amplifying each other. But I have a lot of friends who the entertainment business has ruined their relationships, or who find it difficult to maintain a relationship with somebody outside of the entertainment business because of all the sacrifices and all the instability and stuff that comes from being a creator. And we use the term creator now, so it doesn't matter if you're on social media, if you're creating a course, or if you're creating your stand-up or a film. So if you're an entertainer or a creator, do you think it's fair to your partner to be in the entertainment business? Let me think if I can word this question better. Do you think it's appropriate for people who are married to pursue their dreams in entertainment?
Yeah, because you're here for a blink of an eye, But also, Pythagoras said, even though he was a great mathematician, he said, life is like I'm paraphrasing, but he said, life is like the Olympic Games. There are those people who choose to get in the arena and go for the gold. There are others who choose to sit in the arena and watch those go for the gold. And then there are those who choose to sell trinkets that are watching those go for the gold. And you're one of those three. Mm-hmm. I wanted to be in that arena, and I wanted to go for the gold. My ex-wife, she didn't want to be in the arena. She's just very happy sitting in the arena, and she didn't want to sell any of them damn trinkets either. But that didn't make her wrong. That was just who she was. And it didn't make me wrong. It's who I was. It was a very bad match, because she didn't marry a comedian. Mm-hmm. I came out of the service, I met her when I was home on leave, but then when I came out of service, got married. She married a working guy. Her dad worked in a factory for 38 years, never missed a day, and went to work every day. Went to work sick. He brought a check home every Friday, And I go into this business where there's hardly any money in it. Tim Reed and I were America's first black and white comedy team, as you know. Mm-hmm. And there was no. He had a wife and 2 kids. I had a wife and 3 kids. There was no money in it. So she was adamantly opposed to the business, and rightfully so. But you can. It doesn't matter that you're both in the same profession or one understands the other. It's if you love somebody so much that you want to spend the rest of your life with that person, you want that person to be happy, both of you. And the reason why I say you got to pursue your dream. I talked about this and I'm sure you're hearing it for the second time, but I was on an airplane one time flying, and I picked up everything. I read everything with the air sickness bag, and I read this thing about anthropology. Mm-hmm. And I'm not, Dr. Carl Sagan wrote the article, and I'm not interested in anthropology, but he was talking about dinosaurs ruled the planet for 250 million years. And man in his present form, Cro-Magnon, Neanderthal, to now maybe 100,000, I don't know, somewhere. And that this Earth has been here 5 billion years, according to science, and it's going to be here another 5 billion before the sun destroys the Earth. That the Earth is actually moving closer to the sun, and one day will look not unlike Mars looks like right now. Mm-hmm. But I set that magazine down. I said, this planet was here 5 billion years before I was born. Not thousands, not million, 5 billion. And it's going to be here 5 billion after I die. That means my lifetime in this planet is a blink of an eye, a speck of sand. Pow, it's over. Yep. That you would spend one moment of that blink of an eye bitching and moaning your lot in life. If you spend one moment of that speck of sand, that blink of an eye, not pursuing your dream, not going after what it is you want, it's spitting in your master's face and saying, I don't appreciate this great gift of life. Every day is a celebration. Every day you open your eyes. What wonderful thing am I going to do today? Whose life might I change today? Who might change my life? If someone knocked on your door every day of your life and brought you a unique, original gift every day, how much would you appreciate the gift? How much would you appreciate the giver of the gift? So in answer to your question, yes, go for it. She should go for his, you should go for yours, we both should go for it. That's what you're put here for, to do all you can to follow your dream. And if you don't have a dream, then help somebody else reach theirs.
So I got to ask you, you were divorced, or you mentioned that you refer to her as your ex-wife. So you got married. She married a factory worker, right? You had 3 kids with your first wife.
Mm-hmm. My only wife.
Your only wife. So you never got remarried after
No.
that. Why did the marriage end? Was it because of your role in the entertainment business?
No. Well, no. Just we went our separate ways. After she separated from me 3 times while I was pursuing this show business career. One time before, and then 2 times after. Now, and I finally got her together. I finally brought the kids out here to the West Coast, mm-hmm. and I started doing well. And then now I'm doing the Tonight shows, and I'm, I'm touring with Sammy Davis. I'm touring with all these different artists, Smokey Robinson. I'm making money. We bought a home. And we had 2 cars, and life was really good. But as time went by and the kids were getting older, we realized we weren't compatible anymore.
So obviously, entertainment business did have some effect on your personal life. How would you do it differently now, or would you continue to repeat the same thing in order to be where you are today?
I do exactly what I did. Before I toured with Sammy Davis Jr., I heard him sing a song one time. My wife and I were separated. I was staying in my brother's apartment. He had an attic. That's how I stayed up in the attic. I was so down. I mean, everything was going against me. But I heard Sammy Davis Jr. singing this song, and ironically, years later, I toured with him. But he sang a song called "I Gotta Be Me" from a Broadway play. And the lyrics of that song just really resonated with me. Whether I'm right, whether I'm wrong, whether I find a place in this world or never belong, I gotta be me. I'll go it alone if that's how it must be. I can't be right for somebody else if I'm not right for me. And those lyrics just resonated with me. I could never be the best father, the best husband, the best friend, brother, neighbor, if I was never right for me, if I never pursued that dream of mine. I'd be sitting in a bar somewhere right now. I probably would have been dead a long time ago, but I'd be sitting in a bar telling people, I could have been a comedian. No, if you could have been, you would have been. Don't sit here and tell us what you could have been.
Yep.
And I saw myself in that place that one day I'd be saying, I might have been, I could have been. I said, no, I'm going to go for it. And I don't regret that one bit. And my children, they didn't care whether I was a coal man or a comedian. They didn't care. They and I uprooted them out of their schools in Illinois to come out here and chase my dream. They left their friends and their cousins and their family and schoolmates to follow their dad. And they never stopped saying, I love you, Daddy. I got the greatest kids in the world.
Well, you're very blessed. So that kind of leads me to my next question here. I know a lot of people in the comedy business, and comedy, just like pretty much anything else in entertainment or honestly even in business, a very small percentage of the people have the majority of the success, right? So I see people, I know people just like you, maybe they're not hitchhiking and sleeping in a car, but they're working an Uber job or doing something that they don't want to do so they can get up there and get their 10 minutes at the Comedy Store or the Laugh Factory. So 52 years as a comedian, 45 years in Hollywood. How do you define success?
Christopher Morley had the greatest line. Success is living the life you want. If you wanted to be a wino and just be a wino and just not and let the rest of the world go by.
You only met my wife for 2 minutes. How do you already know what success is to her?
I mean, that it's doing success is living the life you want. People say to me a lot of times as a comedian, they'll say, how come you never got a sitcom? Because I turned them down almost all the time.
Really?
I was touring with Frank Sinatra
Yep.
as his opening act for almost 14 years in 45, 50 cities a year, flying in his private jet all over the world. Now, when I was a little boy shining shoes in a bar in all the neighborhoods, Frank Sinatra was on the jukebox. When I came out of the service and I was tending bar, all my buddies, we'd close the bar and we'd lock it up and I'd be stocking. And Frank would be singing, "Come fly with me. Let's fly away." And my buddies say, "Man, what do you think that'd be like, flying with Frank Sinatra?" And here I was flying with Frank Sinatra all over the world. At the same time, as a kid growing up, I was an athlete. I played football. I played basketball. I'm a little guy, but I played basketball on an all-black basketball team. I played football, all-black football team, and I do a lot of routines about that. In fact, I got an album out in front of an all-black audience called That White Boy Is Crazy. I'm the only white comedian ever do an album in front of an all-black audience. And you heard me say that when people say, how could you do that? I always had the same line. What color is laughter?
It's good.
What's the color of laughter? But at that same time now, I'm also touring on a golf tour. It was basketball, baseball, football, hockey, tennis, and show business people that were 10 handicap or below. So it was Johnny Bench, Mike Schmidt, Mario Lemieux, John Elway, Dan Marino, Michael Jordan. We had 42 Hall of Famers. Show business, it was Jack Wagner, me, Eddie Marinaro, Frankie Avalon, Smokey Robinson, different different people. Now, my point of that is, here I was flying in Frank's jet all around the world, and I was inside of an arena. If you'd have told me when I was a little boy, you hear the guy in the jukebox, one day you're going to go fly with him. If you'd have told me when I was a little boy that one day you're going to get inside of an arena and you're going to compete with the greatest athletes who ever lived in your lifetime, I'd say that's impossible. That can't possibly happen, nor could me flying in Frank Sinatra's jet. And I was doing both of those. And people say, you want to come and do a sitcom? That would mean you're going to be with a crew of, of maybe 6 or 7 or 8 actors, bitching and moaning, complaining. He got 2 laughs more than me and all that stuff. I was living the life I wanted, and I don't regret it at all. A wise philosopher once said, in the end, all you have are memories. He said, in the end, all you have are memories. Make some good ones.
Absolutely.
Vito, I got some good ones.
And I'd love to hear it. So your claim to fame, I would say, is that you were, I use the term Frank Sinatra's right-hand man. You say that's not appropriate, but what was your context into working with Frank Sinatra and how you built your career with him?
It was purely by accident and by being glib at the right time. I had toured with Smokey Robinson, Mac Davis, Tony Orlando and Dawn, Frankie Avalon, James Darren, Gladys Knight and the Pips, Natalie Cole. I was touring with all these different type singers because I could work clean, and they needed a comedian that could work clean in front of their audiences.
It's hard. It's hard to do the clean sets.
But in those days, I'll get back to how I met Frank Sinatra. But in those days, television was this big: ABC, NBC, CBS.
Yeah.
So anywhere you went in America in those days, people say, what do you do for a living? You say, I'm a stand-up comedian. The next question out of their mouth was, oh, yeah, have you ever been on Johnny Carson?
Yep.
If you hadn't been on Johnny Carson in the eyes of America, you just weren't a comedian. You might want to be one. You might going to be one, but you weren't one now. Freddie Prinze made one appearance on The Tonight Show, and the next day got a sitcom. The word was out. That's the show to get on. So as a businessman, you watch the show. Excuse me, we're in show business. That's 2 words, show and business. I'm watching The Tonight Show. How do you get on there? Those comedians had to write material that could make grandma and grandpa, mom and dad, and the kids laugh.
Yep.
There was no cable television in those days. So that's how you had to get on. So now I ended up doing 61 appearances on The Tonight Show. So
61 appearances.
You had to keep coming up with a new 5 minutes every time you did the show, right? So I had developed a wealth of clean material. Now I'm on the road with Smokey Robinson. I'm at Caesar's Palace in Lake Tahoe, Caesar's, and Frank Sinatra's appearing at Harrah's. And I had worked Harrah's many times with Sammy Davis. So I called the maitre d'. Now, and I'll show you how fate is. I could have went over there any night that I was with Smokey. We were there for like a week. I don't know what made me go that particular night, but I came off stage. I called the maitre d' at Harrah's and said, I want to catch Frank's show. He said, don't worry, Tommy, we'll take care of you. I had seen Frank Sinatra perform a couple times. He created more excitement walking to the microphone than most people did with their whole act. When Frank walked out to that microphone, the room was electrified. People would stand and cheer. This was their hero. They loved Frank Sinatra's music. Now, so I didn't want to miss that opening. I leave the stage at Caesar's, and if you know Lake Tahoe, it's one casino away to Harrah's. And so I didn't change out of my stage clothes, and I rush like a madman. I go running into the main showroom, and there's the vice president of Harrah's Hotel standing out in front, a man named Holmes Hendrickson. He's with a guy, heavyset guy with a cigar, And I'm running in the showroom, and he sees me. He said, Tommy, come here. I reluctantly went over because I didn't want to miss Frank's opening. He said, Tommy, this is Mickey Rudin. Well, I recognized the name. That was Frank Sinatra's lawyer, very powerful guy in Hollywood. So he said, Mickey, this is Tom Dreesen, and I think Tom would make a great opening act for Frank Sinatra. And the lawyer rolled his eyes and, like he'd heard this a million times, and he winked at the vice president, but I caught the wink. And he looked at me. He said, hey, kid, if I gave you a week with Frank, would you want more than $50,000? I said, Mr. Rudin, put it this way. If you gave me a week with Frank, would you want more than $50,000? He said, oh, I like this kid. He laughed. Yeah. A week later, they gave me a week with Frank at the Golden Nugget in Atlantic City. They called me to do it. And I the second night I was with him, I can remember like it was yesterday, he and his wife Barbara took me out to dinner. And I was sitting across from him. He set his knife and his fork down. And he said to me, I like your material. And I like your style. I'd like you to do a few other dates with me if you're interested. And I didn't say, let me check my calendar. I said, yeah. I said, oh, yeah, this is, So, and it turned into 45, 50 cities a year. An experience, I was an experienced comedian at that time, excuse me, opening for a lot of stars, excuse me. But I never opened for 20,000 seats for the great Frank Sinatra. I was going into arenas where 20,000 seats. In Hawaii, 40,000 outdoors. Wow. This is a whole different dynamic for a stand-up comedian. If I did 20 minutes tonight at the Comedy Store, or 30 minutes at the Comedy Store, or the Laugh Factory, that same material that I did there, if I took that same exact material to open for Frank in front of 20,000 people, that same material takes on a totally different dynamic. There's a difference in timing, and so it was a real new experience for me. I had to learn a lot of new tricks,
How old were you when Frank recruited you at the dinner?
I was in my late 30s.
Late 30s?
Yeah, I'd already been doing a lot of stuff.
What's the age difference between you and Frank Sinatra?
Oh, he was 28, 30 years maybe older than me. Somewhere around that, probably 28 years older than me or something, 30 years older than me.
Really? Okay, so he was kind of a mentor then.
Oh, without a doubt. Yeah. When I first went on tour with him, he was the boss. Frank Sinatra was the boss of his tour.
Yeah.
He was the boss. And I treated him that way. Later, as time went by, he liked to hang out till dawn. He never went to bed till the sun came up. He was nocturnal, Whether we were on the road or off the road, when I stayed at his home in Rancho Mirage, that he would stay up till dawn, and we'd ride around the desert till dawn. But I forgot what point I was going to here.
Well, anyways, he was a good mentor for you.
I'm sorry. He was the boss.
Yeah.
And then as time went by, he became like a buddy. We were hanging out. Toward the end of his life, he was more like a father to me. He would give me fatherly advice,
That's really nice.
Yeah, a lot of things that I'll take to my grave,
I would love to hear this because I know you got a million Frank Sinatra stories and you've even written like some books and stuff about them. But what is your favorite Frank Sinatra story to tell?
There's 100. That's why I wrote a book called Still Standing: My Journey from Streets and Saloons to the Stage and Sinatra. And it's got I'm plugging, cheap plug, but
plug it. Yeah.
It's got 450 5-star reviews. I'm real proud of the book because I kept stories whenever, from the day I first went in the show business, when Tim Reed and I were America's first black and white comedy team. Whenever something poignant or something funny happened, I'd go back to my room and I'd journal. I'd write it down. I'd turn that all into a real good book that people are enjoying, and it's triumphant. And I want them to enjoy it because I want them to overcome obstacles like I had to overcome it. So I could tell you 100 Frank Sinatra stories. Probably one of the insightful things about him, we were coming out of the Waldorf Astoria one night in New York on our way to do a show. And he went out the back way because if he went out the front, he'd have got mobbed. So we went out the back way and they had a limo back there rushing us to the gig. As we were going out the door, the security was taking us to the limo. A woman jumped out of the doorway, and the doorman told me later on she'd been hiding there for like 5 hours. And she started screaming, "Mr. Sinatra, please, please, Mr. Sinatra, please." And they were rushing us to the limo. And when Frank started getting limo, the security was holding her back. And she kept hollering, "Please, Mr. Sinatra, please." He came back out and he walked up to her. He told security, "Leave her alone." He said, "What is it, ma'am? What is it?" She said, "My husband is homesick. He's terribly, terribly ill. And if I could get an autograph from you, it would mean the world to him." Frank said, "Sure." And he's signing the autograph, and she said, "Oh, what beautiful cufflinks." He had very, very expensive, well over $1,000. I know where these cufflinks came from, well over $1,000. She said, "What beautiful cufflinks." She said, "Thank you." He finished the autograph, and he took the cufflinks off, and he handed them to her. He said, "Give these to your husband." She said, No, I don't want them. I just was admiring them." He said, "No, I want your husband to have them." Now, we get in the limo, Vito, and I said to him, "Frank, that was beautiful, but why did you do that?" He said, "Tommy, if you possess something that you can't give away, then you don't possess it. It possesses you." I said, "Wow, that was really pretty heavy." And then he said, Aristotle Onassis, he said, "Tommy, nothing we have is ours." He said, "That shirt you have on your back, if you die tomorrow, somebody else will be wearing that shirt, So it's not even your shirt." He said, Aristotle Onassis had mansions, private jets, yachts, and billions of dollars. And the second he died, it transferred. None of that was his. He was only using it. Nothing we have is ours. That profoundly changed my life. I could give you 20 different ways, but a simple thing. One time, like a week later, I had all my Goombas, all the Italian guys over my house watching Monday Night Football. The Bears were playing the Vikings, right? And Eddie Marinero's a buddy of mine. He played for the Vikings. So I got all these, I'm going to name drop now, but I had Dennis Farina, Joe Mantegna, Joe Pesci, Eddie Marinero, Frankie Avalon. Frankie was making Philadelphia steak sandwiches. I had all the Goombas over the house, And so I thought, oh, gee, I don't have any beer and pop for the guys. So I rushed over to the liquor store, and I had just played in the Lake Tahoe golf tournament. I had an NBC golf shirt with an NBC hat that matched the golf shirt. And I rushed in there, and because I had played golf that day, I rushed in, and the guy behind the counter, I'm bringing all this stuff to the counter, he was a foreign guy. He said, "Oh, I like your hat, boss. Nice hat. Could I have your hat?" And I said, "No, it matches my shirt." Anyhow, I paid for the stuff. I rushed out to the counter, and I thought, what the hell did I just do? I walked back in. He had 3 or 4 people in line now. Because I took the cap, and I set it way at the end of the counter. And I started going, he said, "Hey, boss, I'm only kidding. I'm only kidding." I said, no, I want you to have it. The thought that a hat possessed me, that I had not grown as a human being, that a hat owned me. And from that point on, I never forgot that. There's a lot of other stories.
That's brilliant, actually. And you know, sometimes you just have to have those really specific things happen to you in order to be tested to see if you've actually learned anything, right? Otherwise, I feel like we just keep reliving the same mistakes over and over again.
Absolutely.
I love the Frank Sinatra story, and since we're talking about having a couple pops, I think we were on Mancow, and you told this great story about Frank, because he loved Jack Daniels, right? That was like his thing. And is there a story where somebody else sponsored him, and he thought it was Jack Daniels?
Yeah, that's great. You remember that.
I remember that, but tell me the details. That's my favorite Frank Sinatra story. My dad loves Jack Daniels. All he does is drink only Jack. I love Jack Daniels too. And then you told that story, and it was like 6 a.m. because we were doing morning radio out there.
Yeah.
And I would just love to hear that story in person right now. It would make my day.
A Scotch company came to Frank's manager and said, "We want to sponsor his tour for the whole summer." And and anyhow, long story short, several $1 million offer and all this other thing, and they finally agreed to it. And anyhow, Frank was getting up in years at the time, but for 50 years or more, when he had 2 songs to go, he would to have a little Jack in the splash, and he would say to the audience, he'd toast the audience, and he always would say, "May you all live to be 150 years old, and the last song and the last voice you hear is mine," something like that. So now, that night, all the opening kickoff of this tour, all these Scotch people are in the audience, all their clients and their representatives, and they're all there. Probably a couple hundred people there from in a 15,000 seat arena, and so the manager was telling him, "Don't forget, that tonight when you drink your toast, it's going to be at Scotch." He said, Yeah. Anyhow, but for 50 years, he's been sipping Jack Daniels. So he gets to that part of the show. He said, "Wonderful audience, ladies and gentlemen." Everybody says, He used to say about Jack Daniels, nectar from the gods, But he got to Scotch. He said to everybody out there, "Salute, may you all live to be 150 years old. The last voice here is mine. Salute." And he goes like this. He goes, he said, "What is this shit?" The manager's face, white as it went, white as this piece of paper, white as it goes. All the clients in the audience, that was the end of that.
Oh man, it's tough. I know how it is too, because I work on a lot of brand deals, and I think that's why that story comes up a lot. And I just wanted to make sure I had it right, so I wanted to be on the record with you with that story, because I heard it once, and I've retold it a lot of times, because it just comes up a lot, And like I said, I like Jack Daniels too, and I'll go to a party or an event, and I'll order the Jack, and I'll drink it, and I had the same thing happen. I just spit it out. I'm like, I don't know what you gave me, but it's not Jack Daniels. So I think there's just something about, I guess you call them the Goombas, but I guess there's something about the guys who like our drinks a certain way. It's hard to, you think you want to get paid, and you think you can veer off, but you just got to keep it real, right?
And Frank was a creature of habit.
Yep.
Excuse me, and he was very loyal to, but he wasn't thinking, I think, when that happened.
No, you get caught up in the moment and stuff. So that makes me think about Frank Sinatra a lot, right? Because he's such a classic, right? He had the movie. He was kind of the triple hitter, right? He was the movie star. He was the singer. He was just kind of like the ultimate entertainer of the time, right? How do you think Frank Sinatra would be received in today's world, and how do you think he would navigate today's entertainment industry?
He would stay true to what he is, his own voice. I'm sure he was dedicated to that. What people forget about, why he's, in my opinion, the greatest pop singer of all time, arguably. I mean, everybody would, most people would agree to that. What people forget about Frank Sinatra was what a great actor he was. He won the Academy Award. He never took an acting lesson. One night, sitting at his home, I was sitting with, these are his house guests, Kirk Douglas, Gregory Peck. They had their wives there. All the women went to bed. It was Kirk Douglas, Gregory Peck, Robert Wagner, Clint Eastwood, Jack Lemmon. And they were talking about film. All us guys were all sitting around. It was like 2 o'clock in the morning. They were talking about film and all that. And I noticed they were showing great reverence to Frank. These learned actors. And I'm curious because in Hollywood, everybody wants to know who you studied with, So I said to Frank, did you study acting? Before he could answer, Gregory Peck grabbed my arm real hard. He said, acting lessons would have ruined him. He was a diamond in the rough you didn't fool with. When Frank Sinatra, when you gave him a song, it became a script. What did the writer feel the night the writer took pen in hand? He would immerse himself in that lyric and become that lonely guy in the bar whose woman left him, and he's never going to find love again. And you felt that. And also the joy of songs. Come fly with me. That no one interpreted lyrics like that. One night having dinner with Frank, Steve Lawrence, who is a great singer, Steve Lawrence said to Frank, you ruined it for all the rest of us. Because once they heard you sing it, they knew how it's supposed to be sung. You felt that. He knew. Charlton Heston said to watch Frank Sinatra sing a song is like watching a 4-minute movie. Because, he just immersed himself in lyrics. He was a great actor, a brilliant actor. And he danced with Gene Kelly, arguably the greatest career show business ever known. And I think today that he would approach the business and stay true to what he's about. And he would interpret the lyrics that way. I'll tell you something interesting. After Frank died, there was a Latin kid, a Mexican kid that had a hip-hop show here in L.A., and I forget what. Anyhow, but he kept pestering my manager. He wanted me on the show, and it was a hip-hop show. And so I told my manager, I passed on. I said, I don't know what they'd want me on the show for, but I come out of stage at the Laugh Factory one night, and I'm walking outside, and this kid comes up to me and told me, he said, hey, I want you to come on my show. I'm asking your manager. I said, oh, I know. My manager told me. Meanwhile, cars would go by blowing horn, people jumping out wanting pictures taken with the guy. Everything was very famous. But I go to his show. I get up at 7:30 in the morning, hip-hop show, and it's playing hip-hop music. And he wanted to interview me in between songs. And he talked. I got Tom Dreesen, who toured with Frank Sinatra. If you have any questions with Frank Sinatra, and the switchboard lit up. And people start calling 17 years old, 19 years old, 18 years old, asking questions about Frank Sinatra. Can I swear on the show?
Here? Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, I want to tell you exactly what the guy said. When we went to commercial break, I said, I don't get it. Hip-hop is so far from Frank Sinatra. I can't believe all these people calling. He said, I said, all these young people calling. He said, oh, man, what you mean? He was a fucking outlaw, man. Now, they saw him, maybe not his music, but they saw him, I did it my way.
Yeah,
I did it my way. And that's when you ask that question, what would he be doing? And he'd be doing it his way.
That's cool. I think that's a great insight. And I do think that Frank Sinatra is one of those acts that have transcended time and space, right? It just always works. I mean, when I'm having a dinner party, first thing I do is I go put classic Frank Sinatra hits on. I mean, it ties the room together, right? It's something that everybody can connect and relate to, and I feel like even Michael Jackson's music doesn't really tie the room together like a Frank Sinatra kind of theme
his
song.
music, when you think about it, Vito, his music is a soundtrack of your life.
Yeah.
People went steady to his music. When somebody loves you, it's no good. People got married to his music, love and marriage. People got divorced to his music. It's 2:45. There's no one in the... People got remarried to his music. Love is lovelier the second time around. It's a soundtrack of your life. When Frank Sinatra died, I went to the house and of course paid my respects and everything, and Barbara asked me to be a pallbearer. I was leaving there, and all the paparazzi and everybody were out in front. I was driving down Sunset Boulevard, and there was a radio show on a talk show, and the woman called in, and she said, my husband fought in World War II and Korea, and he didn't cry at his father's funeral. She said, but he heard today that Frank Sinatra died. He went to his room, and he's in there sobbing. She said, I don't get it. But I got it, because Frank Sinatra, as long as he was alive, a part of you was alive. Whether you're a housewife in Portland, Oregon, or you're a steel worker in Detroit or something, his music was the soundtrack of your life. So if Frank Sinatra died, then maybe we're going to die too.
Yeah, it is a little scary, right? So, and I think part of the reason Frank Sinatra had so much mass appeal, I mean, you hear about the behind-the-scenes stuff and the rumors and whatever, right? That they were going around breaking people's legs, and people in the crew were doing whatever they were doing, right? But living the full-on old-school Vegas life. But he presented himself in a way that was so mainstream, right? And what if Frank Sinatra had done what like the hip-hop artists of today do, where they just kind of do it their way without any they don't care about the censorship or like cutting bad words out of their music. In fact, they like the more bad words and the more stuff that they can put into the music, the more negative the subject matter. They feel it's, for a while, it was getting a lot of attention. Now we're so desensitized to it, right? We've got Cardi B and we've got these people just putting out stuff that's so aggressive and so offensive that it doesn't even like faze us anymore. What if Frank had kind of gone that route? Do you think he would have had the success that he had?
He would have, no, because you had to stay true to what you really are. You didn't, and he truly was a pure singer. He sang from down here.
Yeah.
So he could have never done it. He said to me one time on his jet, we were flying back from a gig, and he said to me humbly, he said, "Tommy, I don't care that my name lives on. I would like the music to live on." And it is, and Michael Bublé say, there are singers out there that young kids today can still understand the lyric. A lot of. By the way, I'm all for singing whatever you want to sing, saying whatever you want to say. That's what thousands of men and women died, so we have the First Amendment.
Yeah.
The freedom of speech. So Frank would have honored that. He didn't understand. He used to say to me about swearing. I never swore in front of his audience. And when we were alone, we were two guys. He was a kid from Hoboken, and I'm a kid from Harvey, Illinois. You'd think that we didn't, interchange, street language and stuff like that. But one night I had like a guy not heckling me, but giving me a lot of back talk, at, I think it was at Caesar's Palace. And anyhow, but it was a fun guy, and I was going back and forth with him, and somehow I would give him a lot of rope. I would repeat what he said back to the microphone so that all the audience could hear it. And finally he said something about himself that it was obvious that I had made that point, but I said, "No shit," and it got a huge laugh. Later on, Frank said to me, "Tommy, that was funny, but you don't need to swear to be funny." I said, "No shit." Today,
No, but kids are saying it to their parents nowadays. It's crazy.
Yeah.
But you made a great point, right? You said a lot of men and women died for that First Amendment, right? And something that I've been noticing, I mean, you're deep in the comedy scene, and I'm in production, and I work with, a lot of people, and communications is a huge thing. Do you feel that there's a war on comedy and a war on free speech overall in America today?
The politically correct police. Yes, there is a war. There's a war on comedy, and comedians are the last bastion of freedom of speech. Lenny Bruce went to jail for it.
Yeah.
Again, thousands of men and women died so that we have the First Amendment. You have the freedom of speech. You don't have to listen to us. You can walk out the door. You can ask for your money back. You can turn the knob, but you can't stop people from. You can't yell fire in a crowded theater, obviously, but you can't stop people from expressing. We live in a country where they don't jail you for freedom of speech, or they didn't used to. They're trying to make it happen now. The politically correct police. And I would say, and who are you? Do you have an organization? Do you have a building do you have a banquet hall that we can go to and we can debate you about freedom of speech? But we don't know who you are, and you keep telling us what we have to say. Now, we know who the Democrats are, the Republicans are, we know who independents are, we know who the Moose, the Kiwanis, the Elks, the JCs, we know who the Ku Klux Klan is, but we don't know who you are, and you keep telling us what we must say. And here's the problem with that. When you start telling us what we must say, your next step is to tell us what we must think, and then say goodbye to the United States of America. We're now a communist nation. So I always end it by saying, so here's what I have to say to you out there. Kiss my black ass.
So
now hold on. I'm waiting for someone to tell me, you can't say that. Why can't I say that? I can say that. You say, well, you don't have a black ass. Well, I think I have one. The guy next door, he has a penis like me. He thinks he can have a baby. I'm not mad at him. He thinks he can have a baby. Okay, you think you can have a baby. I think I got a black ass.
Well, it's a good way to make the impact, but I'm just saying, it's interesting right now, right? And my question for you is, 52 years of doing comedy. Have you ever seen a climate like this before?
No, I never seen so much. It's harder today to be a stand-up comedian. When I started out, it was very difficult to make it in stand-up comedy. But today, for a lot of reasons, it's harder to make it. Number one, there were no comedy clubs when I started out. There were no comedy clubs. Tim Reed and I, as I keep pointing out, were America's first black and white comedy team. So we had to work clubs. So you had to have an act to get into the club. There weren't open mic nights, things like that. So you had to develop an act almost at home and then take it into a club. Tim and I used to work the Chitlin circuit, black-owned, black-operated nightclubs, the 20 Grand in Detroit, the High Chaparral in Chicago, the Burning Spear in Chicago, the Cotton Club, the Dating Club Lounge, the Sugar Shack in Boston, the Club Harlem in Atlantic City. These are the clubs we worked. And we worked white clubs too, the Playboy circuits and stuff like that. But today, there's all of a sudden, overnight, there became 550 comedy clubs. That meant, there was 3 in Tulsa, Oklahoma. They're all over the country now. There's far more comedians today than there were when I started out. So the competition is far greater, And then again, it also, that you have these politically correct police telling these kids what they should say and what they shouldn't say, There are some comedians who get away with it today because they grandfathered themselves in. They got this big following, and now you know what they're going to say. But there's some evil people out there that are going to try to shut down the freedom of speech. And you can't we shouldn't be able to do that with our Constitution.
So there is a war on free speech. There's a war on comedy. How do we fight it, and how do we win?
Keep fighting back. You can't. You can't. Lenny Bruce went to jail because of his words. A lot of people didn't agree with his words, and maybe some of them I didn't agree with, but I did agree with he had a right to say it. So you take him to the max. Don't let them shut you down.
So one of the big things that is affecting the war on comedy and free speech in general is the ability for these social media networks to deplatform anybody that they don't agree with on the basis of misinformation. I don't understand how parody could be perpetuated as misinformation, but it's just an easy excuse to be able to silence anybody they want. Was there anything like that when you were doing comedy? Obviously, there wasn't social media networks, but there was television, there was platforms. Were people canceled for their thoughts back then? And did the powers that be, did the government, or did people who didn't benefit from speech being free ever try to cancel you or shut down your ability to tell a story?
Well, you know what misinformation is? It's when you don't agree with me. When my politics don't agree with your politics, we call that misinformation, and which is bullshit, which is absolute bullshit. But there was when Tim Reed and I started out, we were America's first black and white comedy team. You didn't see a black guy and a white guy walking down the street together, let alone on the stage together. So when we walked out in front of an all-black audience or an all-white audience, there was a hush came over the room. What is this about? There were some people that were against what we did. And the 4th time on stage, a guy put a lit cigarette out in Tim's face and then tried to beat the bejesus out of me. I boxed when I was in the Navy, but he outweighed me by 100 pounds. Big guy, And then at University of Illinois one night, a guy went out and packed a snowball and hit me right in the face with the snowball. While we were on stage, it came out of nowhere. For the most part, people liked what we did. There was always that one element, that small percentage, a person that didn't like to see a black guy and a white guy get along. If there was a black guy who hated white people, hated them with a passion, he wasn't mad at me. He was mad at Tim for being with me. If there was a white guy who hated black people with a passion, he wasn't mad at Tim. He was mad at me for being with Tim. It was just that reverse racism type of thing. But it was really in the minority.
So that's the interesting thing, though, is all these things that you described about people trying to, shut down whatever you were doing. The difference was they had to confront you in person. Now we have what I call these invisible enemies on the internet, right? Yeah. And it just makes small fringe groups seem much more amplified, right? So my question is, do you think that the government benefits by people being offended?
If the government listens, yeah. Then they benefit by it, because if people are offended, if I used to say about critics, tell me when people walk out of my show, did they think that the price was right for the show? Did they enjoy the show or something? Would they recommend my show to other people? But if there was criticism of my performance, if some guy said, I think he's a jerk, I didn't think he's funny, whatever, comedians get used to these kind of guys. But if there was a percentage of people that said, I don't like the way he does such, I would take heed to it then. I'd listen. First of all, constructive criticism is always good for any comedian, And if you got an open mind, I want to hear your criticisms. But if you're just some jerk that's got a computer in the basement, and his mom and dad are upstairs, and he's 45 years old, still living with mom and dad, but now he's got power. Now he can say, Vito Glazer is a numbnuts. Vito Glazer is a jerk.
Oh, trust me, and they love doing it. They love it.
Yeah,
they love it
because they have a source of power. So, but again, if a certain criticism is consistent, then I'll listen. I really do want to listen. And that's when you answer to your question. If the government listens,
So I'm of the accord that the government actually is perpetuating a lot of this anti-free speech, kind of what I'll refer to as propaganda, right, or the opportunities for companies to censor free speech. I think that they get a lot of benefit from it because they get more control, right? And if they have control, then they have more people relying on them. I don't think free speech in comedy is great for people who are in power, right? So that's kind of my opinion. I wanted to hear your insight on it, but I want to kind of get off of the serious stuff and talk. You've met a lot of amazing people in your career. Indisputably, probably more than anybody that I've ever met, right? And if you had the opportunity to collaborate with one celebrity, dead or alive, who would you love to work with?
Would I love to work with? There was never anything out there like working with Frank Sinatra.
I knew you were going to say that.
I mean, you have to be realistic. I love Smokey Robinson. He's one of my dearest friends in the whole world. Every year I would run 26 miles for multiple sclerosis. My sister had MS. We called it 26 miles for Darlene. And I'd go back to Chicago, and I'd bring back 15, 20, 30 celebrities. They'd come back with me, all these celebrities, and they would run a block with me, 2 blocks with me. The Chicago Bears and the Chicago Cubs would come, and they'd run, part of a mile, 2 miles, whatever. Smokey's the only one who ran all 26 miles with me. He's one of my dearest friends in the whole world. He's a living legend, Smokey Robinson.
Yes.
He's written over 4,000 songs. Do you know that?
I didn't know that.
As you and I are talking right now, Smokey's getting a check from ASCAP.
Wow.
But he was a delight, and he's my dear friend. So touring with Smokey, that's great. Talking with Smokey, we play golf together. I love him like a brother, and he as well loves me. But some people like that, there's national treasures. Frank was a national treasure, he really was, and Smokey is a national treasure. Those kind of people that you admired before you were ever in this business, and then you get to meet them. If it was past, I would love to have. To be honest with this, if I think about this sometimes, I would love to have sat and talked with Abraham Lincoln. I'd really like to have picked his brain because he had a sense of humor. There was funny things he did. I gave a talk where he gave a speech one time. They were honoring Abraham Lincoln, and I gave a talk about his humor. I would like to talk to him. But the other thing too is, and it sounds like a cliche, but I wish I could talk to Jesus. Now people say they talk to him all the time, but I found it fascinating that this man, at age 30 to 33, he only ministered 3 years. And the profound effect he had on the world today. He only ministered 3 years. He never wandered 20 miles outside of his village. And yet, the profound effect he had on the world. Whether you believe in him or not as the Son of God is a totally different thing. I would love to have sat down and talked to him. I once wrote a play called What Made Jesus Laugh. It was a thought I had, and I could never get it off the ground. But everything I read, I never read that he laughed anywhere. And he hung out. He had his buddies. He hung around with his disciples. They must have sat around and had some jokes or some laughs once in a while. So I wrote a fictional play called What Made Jesus Laugh. And it was a play about, I'll try to make this short, there was 3 acts in it, but and I also had I always wondered, who was the first stand-up comedian, not the court jester, the first person who actually got up and did a monologue. So I created this character named Thomas, of course, and he sold wares with his father. They sold wares to the caravans. And Thomas was always telling funny stories. And his father would, like most fathers of comedians today, would say, where are you going to go with that? They get rid of that stupid stuff. Learn a trade anyway. Anyhow, so, and at that time, Thomas was, one day Thomas was telling some funny stories to the caravans when his father wasn't there, to the caravan drivers and stuff, and merchants. And so he hears, when he tells this funny story, he hears this big heavenly laugh, this baritone kind of laugh. And he turns around, there's this young guy named Jesus. And Jesus says, "You're very funny, Thomas. You know, you should do that. You should do that more often." And he said, "My Father wants me to go into his business." And Jesus said, "I'm about to go into my Father's business too." You know, end of Act 1. Act 2, Thomas is now, he sneaks into a club one night, and the owner tells him, "Get out of here." He wanted to get up and tell some funny stories. The owner, "Get out of here." And the owner goes in the kitchen, and the dancing girls leave the stage, and in the audience, the caravan guys are getting up and they're starting to leave, and Thomas jumps up on the stage because the owner's in the kitchen, and he starts telling funny stories, and the caravan guys say, "Hey, that's Jacob's son. Yeah, this kid's funny." And they all sit down and order more drinks. Well, the owner comes out, he wants to pull him off the stage, but he looks and sees they're ordering for a second time. Bingo, thus the first stand-up comedian gets his first job. Now he starts growing as a comedian. At the end of Act 2, and Jesus is now getting followings around the area. So he sees Jesus at the end of Act 2, and Jesus says, "You're doing real good, aren't you, Thomas?" He said, I hear you're drawing big crowds too, Jesus. He said, "Yeah, anyhow, blah, blah." Now, in Act 3, Thomas has grown so much as a comedian now. He's starting to do jokes about the Roman Empire and taxation, and he's getting warned, knock this off. Anyhow, he keeps going. Jesus is growing. At the end of Act 3, it's the end of the show. Thomas is stoned to death because he went against the government. He's laying there dying, and Jesus is holding him in his arms. And he says to Jesus, "I don't want to die." And Jesus says, "Thomas, you'll never die." And as the curtain's starting to go down, you hear Milton Berle, Johnny Carson, Bob Hope, Jack Benny. You hear voices, George Burns. You heard these guys from their act. That's where it went on to, And I never could get it off the ground.
Well, when asked the question, what celebrity would you like to work with, the correct answer was Vito Glazers, but that was a great answer anyway.
Well, I am working with Vito Glazers.
I'm just kidding around. So, you said something earlier, too, that I wanted to come back to about The Tonight Show. So you had to be on The Tonight Show to be legit, right? That was kind of
in that day, yeah.
In that day. So what would you consider today's equivalent of that be for a comedian?
Let's see. I would have to say Joe Rogan.
Rogan?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, because he's got like 12 million followers.
Yep.
I mean, then,
he's got like 100 million.
Well, he does, yeah. I mean, you might 12 million people might listen that day, but it goes out to 100 million people. He could fill your houses. If you went on his show and he liked you, and you could fill rooms after that. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's interesting because one of the most requested podcast bookings that my clients and even brands ask for is everybody asks for Rogan, and that's a really good insight because. Now, what's interesting is they charge so now he's managed by Spotify, so they charge a fortune. I can actually get like a brand on Rogan. It's around $250K in minimum ad budget, and then you get like a 15-second read, basically, right? And then you can have that Rogan ad kind of play during different podcasts and during his own podcast as well. But what's interesting and what's cool about Rogan is he hasn't forgotten about his stand-up comedy roots because if he likes your comedy and your act, he will have you on. Yeah. And it doesn't cost anything, and he just gives you a platform to kind of share the story, and I think that's really cool. So for anybody listening who's trying to get into comedy, Joe Rogan podcast, that, in your opinion, is today's version of the Tonight Show as far as credibility to a comic.
Yeah, not only today's version, it's multiplied by, Johnny Carson had 28 million people watch his show. So one appearance on the Tonight Show, and all of a sudden, a whole world opened up to me. I was doing Dinah Shore, Merv Griffin, Mike Douglas, Johnny Carson, Midnight Special, Rock Concert, Soul Train, American Bandstand. I was the only white comedian to ever do Soul Train. That show opened up all those other shows for me. But Rogan's audiences, that fills clubs all around the country. And also, I listen to his show. He's a great, I love the way he interviews. He listens, and at some point, he'll throw something in that's so profound. Joe Rogan's the guy. He's the.
Have you done a show?
No.
I'm surprised.
Well,
you're a great storyteller. I know he's.
Yeah, I have high regard for him. I really have high respect for him, but I don't know why I don't do a show.
No, we'll take a clip from this. We'll shoot it his way. Okay, so we got a few minutes left here, and one of the reasons we connected is because I saw your new motivational talk that you're doing over at the Comedy Store. You've done it at Comedy Chateau, I guess. Is this a new thing that you're doing? You're going to be kind of sharing this information, or did you just do it a couple times? Did you film it? You're trying to put it out there?
No, I've done this for years. I do it for corporate America. Again, I'll repeat. I talk on 4 subjects: perception, visualization, self-talk, and develop a sense of humor. And I elaborate on those 4 points. But it's a passion of mine. I've read literally hundreds of books on the powers of the mind, from Norman Vincent Peale's The Power of Positive Thinking, Psycho-Cybernetics, Maxwell Maltz, the Power of Your Subconscious Mind by Joseph Murphy, and PMA, Dale Carnegie books, Think and Grow Rich. I've read literally hundreds of books on the powers of the mind. And I'm very spiritual. I believe in a higher power. And I used all these principles and these sciences to, all my dreams have come true. And I want to share that. I want to show others in my profession or in the corporate world. I do it for corporate America. I also give my talk at universities or high schools. I love motivating people. I love, people trying to help them be all they can be in this short blink of an eye that we are on this planet,
Yeah, and that's awesome. And the mind is so powerful. And I talk a lot about. I created this little thing called the gratitude gang, where you just have to be grateful, because the more grateful you are for what you have, the more God gives you to be grateful for, right?
No question about it.
But the mind can play a lot of tricks on you. And my wife, for example, very popular comedian, and she's generated millions of followers. She was the fastest growing female comedian of all time on TikTok. During the pandemic, and she was selling BMWs and Rolls Royces before that. She had no background in comedy. She'd never taken a class or anything. She does these skits. She's terrified of going on stage. Most of these comedians, they're out here begging to, get 5 minutes of time. She got a call from the Comedy Store when Chappelle was in town. They wanted to give her 5 minutes. And she passed. I couldn't believe it. I said, "I'll take it for you." And they're like, So what would you say to somebody like that who's like so immensely talented, but afraid to share their story on a platform like a live audience?
Well, first of all, I talk about this. They did a survey around the world, the insurance companies, for 8 years, of the 10 fears of man. They went around the world. Death was
she's
fourth.
a woman, but yeah.
Oh well, man in the generic sense.
Just kidding.
But death was fourth, pain was second, getting up in front of an audience was the number one fear of mankind. Most people, when they have to get up in front of an audience, like if she was going on to the Comedy Store, all week long she'd be rehearsing what she's going to say, and she would envision herself not doing well. What if that doesn't work? And her hands would start to sweat, her heart start to pound, because the subconscious mind doesn't know the difference between truth or fiction. It only knows what you program into it, the subconscious mind. Whatever the mind can see and believe, it will achieve, was written thousands of years ago. So whatever the mind can see and believe, it will achieve. I read the book, The Power of Your Subconscious Mind by Joseph Murphy, and it taught me how to program my subconscious mind. So whenever I would think of myself on stage when I was new and about what I was going to do, and I'd picture myself on stage, and if it wasn't working, my hands would sweat, my heart would pound. I would go, cancel, and I would envision myself doing well. Whatever the mind can see and believe, it will achieve. There's another bit of philosophy. Act as if you are, and you will be. I wanted to be a calm, relaxed comedian. I wanted to feel comfortable on stage. I wasn't when I was brand new, so I began to see it, feel it, and believe it. I would see myself doing well on that stage, and then I would start acting as if I was that character. No matter what was going on inside here, I'd act if I were. So act as if you are, and you will be. So whenever you'd see yourself on that stage, see yourself doing well. Every time you get a negative thought about it, cancel, and see yourself. In fact, over-exaggerate. Not only are you doing well, when you finish, the crowd stands up, they rush to the stage, and they carry you outside, out into the parking lot on their shoulders. Now you say ridiculous, so is a negative thought. Don't give that negative thought any power. You have the power to empower yourself. The powers of the mind are incredible. You want to exercise? If I say to anybody, I want you to get physically fit. You say, I know how to do that. One word, exercise. I say, I want you to get mentally fit. Most people go, duh. No, same thing, one word, exercise. Exercise the mind the way you exercise the body. When I was sleeping in the abandoned car, hitchhiking up and down Sunset Boulevard, I would jog some days, and I would jog to a cadence. Nothing can defeat me. Nothing can defeat me. Nothing. I was exercising my body, but I was exercising my mind. So it's a long story to a short question, but tell the wife, don't see yourself failing. See yourself succeeding. See Vito saying to you, honey, you were terrific up there. See see it, feel it, and believe it, and then start acting like you are.
I always say, dream it, believe it, achieve it, right? That's kind of how we break it down. So anyways, this has been an amazing conversation. Where can people find you if they're interested in learning more?
Right now, I'm sitting here with Vito Glazer.
That's right.
I have a website, tomdreesen.com, DREESEN, tomdreesen.com, and they can go there and find me, and of course, I'm going around the country. I do a one-man show now, a 90-minute show called The Man Who Made Sinatra Laugh. It's a 90-minute show about my life. He just happens to be at the end of my life, but it's all about stand-up comedy. I started with stand-up comedy, and I eventually, after about 30 minutes, I segue to a bar where there's a bottle of Jack Daniels on the bar, and I tell a funny story, and all the lights go out, and I tell a funny story. The audience is laughing, lights go out, and on the screen, Frank is singing. It's 2:45. There's no one in the place except you and me. Like he's talking to me. I'm behind the bar, like I'm the bartender. When he goes off screen, a spotlight hits me, and now I'm in a bar, and I've come home, and I say to the audience, the first time I heard that voice, I was 10 years old, shining shoes in a bar in Harvey, Illinois, and he was on the jukebox. Then I take the audience from that little boy hearing Sinatra on the jukebox, when he was 10 years old, and hearing Sinatra on the jukebox in Harvey, Illinois, to one day carrying his coffin out of a church in Beverly Hills, California, and I take them on that journey. And it's all funny stories and poignant stories, and it's a story of my life and everything. And in the end, I take them to the funeral. I actually have them in tears. And then I close with a very funny monologue. And they laugh, and I end with a toast, I say, with the Jack Daniels. I wish for all of you what Frank Sinatra wished for you. The very last song he ever sang is "The Best Is Yet to Come." Good night, everybody. And Frank is singing "The Best Is Yet to Come" as I'm leaving, as they're leaving the theater,
Well, that sounds like a great show, and I encourage everybody to check it out. Ladies and gentlemen, this has been another very special episode of Vito Glazers After Dark, live from West Hollywood, California, with comedian and Frank Sinatra opening act Tom Dreesen. You can check him out at tomdreesen.com. All the links will be in the info here, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you, Vito. It was fun, a lot of fun.
Grateful to have you. Hello, everybody, and thank you so much for tuning in to our latest episode of Vito Glazers After Dark, live from the Soho House in West Hollywood, California. And if you enjoyed tonight's episode and you'd like to know how you can support us, I invite you to check out one of our affiliate partners, Try Carrot. Carrot is an influencer black card. It's the first charge card and credit card that's built around underwriting your social media audience in order to approve you for your credit limit. It's really cool and really innovative financially. And on top of that, the Black Card gives you access to some amazing events, like they did a casino night in downtown LA. They do all kinds of influencer support groups and influencer opportunities. So if that's something that you're interested in, if you're an influencer or you're an entrepreneur that is active on social media and you would like to check out a really cool credit card or charge card, I got approved for up to $15,000. You can apply for free at influencerblackcard.com. So again, if you enjoyed the episode tonight and you'd like to learn how you can support us without having to spend any money at all, you can apply for free. I invite you to check out influencerblackcard.com. And if you have any questions about it, feel free to DM me on Instagram at Vito Glazers, and I can tell you all about it.